Hello.
Hello.
Hello there.
Oh my goodness.
Huh, your voice really is that low.
I know, right?
Well, I wasn't lying or anything.
Yeah, a lot of people theorize that you edited it.
I kind of suspected that you didn't, but I'm still surprised.
No, it's just an old voice.
Okay, so I guess, just to start off, I think everybody should just introduce themselves, so I guess we'll start with Voice Guy, then Illya, and then I'll introduce myself real quick. Okay?
Hello, my name is Voice Guy. I've been narrating MLP Fix since 2014. I currently have about 190 subscribers on YouTube, one patron on Patreon donating $1, and I also do streams on Twitch in which I invite fans over to hang out, chat about what they like, and even suggest edits on stories that I've narrated.
And my turn now, then. I am Illya Leonov. I narrate what we call, or what I call, audiobooks of fanfics. I have a channel with about 2,500 subscribers, and I have about 150 things up on the YouTube site and SoundCloud site as well. I do mostly MLP fan fiction. I work in an occasional Poe or Lovecraft or a bit of poetry and some of my own poetry and a bit of music. So that's what I do.
Okay. And my name is Kitsune Heart. I have not done much My Little Pony recording. I've done some things, ancient things for Artemis Fowl, and more recently some Steven Universe stuff. Mostly what I do for audio recordings is I work with Ginger Lee's archive, which I'll explain to you in a moment, in a few minutes, just getting things archived and managed. And kind of the reason I wanted to get in contact with a few My Little Pony recorders is that there actually is a very large My Little Pony Friendship is Magic fic recording community, which has somehow completely not connected to podfic as a whole. And I thought it was really fascinating, and I was wanting to look into, I guess basically to start with, how did you two actually become involved in recording pony fanfic? And like, what is the recorder community like? Because I believe one of you mentioned that you are part of like a Skype group of some recorders. So there is some connection. It's just like there's two isolated communities. There's Pony, and then there's like everyone else.
Well, in my own personal story, I have to admit that I was not even aware of any great podfic recording group. I didn't know much about other fandoms and how long this had been going on. I had assumed, I've recently learned I was a bit wrong, but I had assumed that this all grew up with YouTube, because before YouTube or SoundCloud, there wouldn't have been much of a sharing medium, but apparently there have been people recording these things and handing them back and forth on tapes for years, which I wasn't even aware of.
When I got into recording, I've been mainly hanging out on the film fiction group on 4chan, their particular threads, and they would post stories that they liked, they disliked, and of course they'd say, what typical 4chaners would say about stories they didn't like. And one day they'd taken one of the particularly awful stories, and I thought, hey, what if I narrated it? And this was before YouTube, or this was before I would post the videos on YouTube. I would do Vocaroo links. Have either of you heard of Vocaroo?
Yeah, is that older than YouTube?
Yes.
I didn't know.
I would use Vocaroo links instead of YouTube, but Vocaroo links are fleeting. They get deleted like after a few months. And that's when I thought Soundgarden. But after a while, you can only post so much content on Soundgarden before they charge you, I believe, right?
Well, yeah, and it's where you want to be seen. I mean, I've had a SoundCloud site longer than I've had a YouTube site, but I don't get nearly as much traffic on SoundCloud because YouTube is simply where everybody goes. So,
yes,
I think you probably need to be there even if you're somewhere else.
Yeah, and so I just thought, hey, what if I just upload the recordings on YouTube? And so simply with Movie Maker, I add the title, I add whatever chapter I narrated, if there is a chapter. And that's about it.
Well, my entry story is probably a bit... There are a lot of things that make my story anomalous, and I think they all stem from one fact that I jokingly call myself the oldest brony in existence. I'm not, I'm sure, but I'm the oldest one that I know. And so I don't have a lot of connection with modern pop culture. It's really odd that I would even be into the MLP fandom, but I had a legitimate route in. But my pop culture was the 60s and the 70s. I am 61 years old. So people always go, what in the world are you doing?
Having fun.
But I've had a microphone in my hand ever since I was 5. My oldest memories are my father, who was a guitarist, and talking on his microphone. And I bought my own, or didn't buy it, I didn't have any money, but I was given one when I was 9. And so since the early 60s, I've just been recording my voice over and over. And then I got into some radio. I did some advertising on radio and recorded those nefarious and awful add-on hold things that you see when you get on telephone and somebody puts you on hold and you have an advertisement. But I'd never done a story. Never tried it. And the first fanfic that I ever read was a My Little Pony fanfic, and it was Past Sins.
Oh yeah,
sort of a seminal fanfic. It kind of got me hooked on the genre. I said, I'd always assumed that fan fiction was horrid, that it was trash and there wasn't anything good written, and just assumed that because they weren't professional writers. Well, that's a bull. I mean, non-professional musicians are as good as professional musicians quite often. So I was blown away by how good Past Sins was. And I said, you know what? I think I'd like to read that and record it. And so I did. But that's not my entry into MLP, but it is my entry into recording fanfics.
I know for me and sort of the fanfic recording community at large, I actually wasn't aware that people were recording these on tapes, but I guess it makes sense overall. I only really became aware of recording fics about 8 years ago, but as for hosting, fandom as a community has had this website called Gingerly's Archive, which I'm looking at it, the oldest fic I'm finding is from August 2007. And so this is actually a site that an individual hosts, or hosted kind of at this point, just on their own dime, and people could load up their files there, and they would be just kind of tagged, and then you would be able to download them from the archive. So that's kind of where one of the first really big homes of Podfic is. Unfortunately, in the last year, that site seems to be dying. We really haven't heard from General Ginger in about 9 months. And we had like a very large corruption issue with one of the backups during moving files. So things are very much moving away from that simply because it looks like a lot of our old history has kind of been lost because of that. So for nearly 10 years now, there's been that Gingerly's Archive, and there have been other sites from before that. More recent, we have another person, Haraka, and she hosts a lot of things. So people will go to other websites like the Archive of Our Own, and they'll make their post there, and then their download link goes to Paraka's site. And Paraka is, again, I think doing this on her own dime. I honestly don't know what the setup there is, but she hosts so much stuff, and we're all very thankful to her. She actually runs this podcast. She's just handed it off to me for this recording. And so I guess that answers my question about why YouTube. It's just a cheap hosting platform.
Well, it just takes over. I mean, if somebody wants to look for something, and it's got Google power too, so I mean, everything about wanting to find something is there. I can't imagine a lot of smaller sites surviving in the face of that juggernaut.
But the catch-22 of that is that YouTube is so large. How do you find the content that you want to find?
Well, that's a difficult question. There is an MLP fan fiction audio website. I can't remember the name of it right now. I've got several things there, but I posted probably 30 or 40 pieces there, and they don't get a lot of traffic, so I just stopped bothering. That's the problem. If you're going to have some separate thing where everyone will be able to know everything is, then somebody's got to maintain it. Somebody's got to buy server space. I mean, it's quite a project to do that when it gets so large. And we're not talking about text anymore. We're talking about audio, which is rather dense.
And I think this is especially true with the pony community because it's very large. And while there is a large podfic community, there is just an enormous My Little Pony community that can kind of descend on a website and do a fair bit of trouble if the hosting isn't set up correctly.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's not really a problem with YouTube. You can't really crash YouTube very easily. But there is one thing that I was kind of curious about this. Since it is on YouTube, you do kind of have to follow their terms of service and everything. And I definitely have seen some people get their stories taken down because they'll use a picture from the show as a cover. Have you ever run into any problems hosting on YouTube that way?
Daniel, how about you?
No, not really. I mean, the cover art, the thumbnails that I use for my videos are basically the cover art of the stories themselves, and if they have cover art. And if not, I just create a title in Movie Maker that's just the title of the story.
I do pretty much the same thing. Sometimes, say if I do a song, perhaps, and I want to have different images during the song, then I'll search the web, usually DeviantArt, and there's a lot of images there. And I'll find images that are relevant to the song, and then I credit the images. I used to ask in advance, but no one ever said no. They always said, "Oh, sure, I'd love to have you use it." So the main thing I've had problem with in the past is music, because I always have bumper music in and out of the thing. And one time, there was a story that I did called "March to the Scaffold" by let's see, I think it was Kitsune. I think, I can't remember. No. Anyway, he had made all these suggestions during each chapter. He said, "Okay, when you read this chapter, play this music with it." And he'd suggested music. Well, I was naive, and I just put all that music as bumper music and got all sorts of hits. It was famous things, famous recordings, and a lot of them were Germans. And Germans are very, very strict with their copywriting. They don't let you get away with much. And SoundCloud was largely German in those days. So I had to take those down, and so I commissioned Reverb Brony, who's a musician in the fandom that I know, to do bumper music for that one. And I had to redo all the videos, and I learned my lesson there. So now I get my music mostly from a site called Incompetech, which I forget his name, Kevin McLeod, I think is his name. And he has a thing on his site. He says, "You can use any of my music as long as you credit me." And so I do. So it's just a learning process. You can't get away with murder. No.
The only real problems I've had with the music end is that very recently I had done a stream for one of the chapters of The Chase. And somebody suggested, "Hey, oh no, not the Chase. Actually, it was Celestia's Relaxing Vacation. Have you ever heard of that?"
I have not.
I probably have it on my to-listen list. It's the listening list is very long.
For Celestia's Relaxing Vacation, I'll say it's very something. And for the list of characters that was in the description is 4,000 words long, right? And for the description,
that's a long description.
Oh, well, the description is, like, this is what happens in the story, and then the list of characters, the list of fetishes that happens in the story. And somebody had suggested, hey, for the list of characters, why don't you play Tiny Tim's Tiptoe Through the Window? And I had done that just as like 10 seconds long, and I got copyright stricken, so I had to take down the video. I had to redo get rid of the audio and upload it back up.
It breaks your heart, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It was really funny.
Oh.
I was able to keep some of the other things, but now as a rule, I say no copyrighted music, please.
Yeah. So, Voice Guy, I know sometimes you do some of the more awful and grimdark fics, and you've never had a problem there with YouTube content?
As long as you tag things properly and mark it as age restricted, I've never really had a problem with that. I've never really been reported.
The only times heard that.
You go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to. I'm not a very good Skyper, I suppose. I tend to treat it as a conversation. I was just going to say that no, I've never heard of that sort of thing happening.
The only times I've ever been reported, I guess, have been authors that have been salty that I've made fun of their story.
Oh, and so that does come to like my next question. And I also know that Illya was talking about getting permission for images. So, do you have like a process of asking writers before you record? Because like in the podfic community at large, we have on the website Fanlore, we have a very long list of people who say you're free to record whenever you want. You don't have to ask me. But otherwise, kind of the process is always to ask first. And I was curious if that's in the Brony recording community, is there a thing of asking first, or is it just assumed among Bronies that you can go ahead and record? Because that was the one thing that I've been about.
It's a changing landscape. Let me put it that way. I think everyone was a bit tentative when they began. I used to always get permission before every story, and then I found that sometimes the people wouldn't answer back, but when they did, they were always, enthusiastic to have their story done as an audiobook. I mean, it was an honor. It's a piece of fan fiction. Somebody wants to do an audiobook. Oh, excellent. And then one time I didn't. There was an author that's a good author, a well-known author named Bad Horse. And I did one of his fictions, and then I told him I had done it, and I tentatively asked him permission during the time I was telling me I was doing the fic, and he was so complimentary to me. He went on his blog and he said that it was like being asked by Francis Ford Coppola, "Would you mind if I take that story and make a movie?" Which I thought was very, very, very much an honor to have the author treatment thing. And since I've gotten such overwhelming support, I've sort of slacked off on asking. I really don't do it so much anymore.
No, I've never asked. I've never asked, not once. Whenever I see a story that I would like to narrate, I just take if it's short, I just narrated it, and then once it's uploaded, I upload the video in the comment section of the particular story. And they've always been appreciative. If they've replied back, they've always been like, "Hey, that's awesome. That was really cool."
Voice Guy, do you not send them a PM after you've uploaded it at all?
if they haven't replied in like say a week or two, I usually will say, hey, I did this narration. Do you like it? And they've always said yes, but there has been one who said, no, I don't like it. Can you please take that down?
Wow.
And I was on two sides of it. Part of me wanted to say, sure, but the other part of me wanted to say, well, you don't really own it.
Yeah, it's a derivative work out of a derivative work. That's it's not. It doesn't have any legal legs, but there is politeness.
Well, I'm not a.
I'm not very damn polite.
Yeah, I'll admit I'm not the most polite person.
Well, that's all right. To each his own.
The reason I actually ended up doing this recording is because about a month ago, Shadow of Cygnus messaged me saying that he had done a recording of a fic I did, which caught me out of the blue because I hadn't been contacted first, and I was at first like a little like, and then I remembered that I'm actually on Fanlore for blanket permission, and I know that he didn't go there, but it was kind of like, I was okay with it in general. But yeah, I think that is I think one of the biggest divides between My Little Pony recorders and fan recorders in general, because again, there are so many resources, like on Gingerly's archive. If they find out that you recorded something without getting permission, they will remove it. If an author contacts and says they don't want their fic on there, they'll remove it. It's very big on personal ownership of your recordings. I actually have this agreement with somebody that I recorded like a 24-hour long fic, and she had this habit of posting it and removing it and posting it and removing it as she went through like periods of religious fervor. And part of our agreement was that if I go through all the trouble of doing this, you're not going to make me take it down again. And I actually like have a screenshot of that just in case she comes back around and changes her mind later. Like, she agreed that it can be there forever because I put in 100 plus hours on this thing.
I just can't imagine anybody in the pony community not wanting this story to be spread around a bit more. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think a big thing that ends up happening is that as people get, a lot of these writers are, in their younger years, and as they get older, sometimes they become embarrassed by their old work, or they're trying to hide it for employment purposes. Well, and so that is a thing that happens.
I suppose it depends on the content of the story to a certain extent.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing I found very interesting is that the My Little Pony writers actually have their own website just for fan fiction. It's fimfiction.com, is that?
Oh, yeah.
.net. Finfiction.
.net.
Yeah, finfiction.net is huge.
Yeah, it is very large. And like fandom as in general instead uses a website called The Archive of Our Own, which is a subsection of the nonprofit Organization for Transformative Works. And that actually exists to help defend fandom in a legal standpoint. And so they actually have gone like before various congressional hearings to argue for creative works and things like that.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's yeah. But the My Little Pony people are just kind of like off on their own thing.
Well, they are, and I think a lot of them. A lot of the ones I know were in other fandoms at one point or another, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are just drawn into this huge maelstrom of My Little Pony without being exposed to a lot of other fandoms and fics and things like that. So there's just it's a maelstrom. Femfiction.net is a juggernaut. It's got several billion words of fan fiction. And the other day, I think it was you mentioned something about Fallout Equestria. You call that one? There are over 120 Fallout Equestria stories with a combined total of somewhere around 120 million words. And that's just Fallout Equestria. There are millions and millions and millions, billions actually, words on fanfiction.net. And it just sort of bowls everyone over. And it's just, it's hard to get too concerned about any one little tiny story in that gigantic group.
Yeah, and I mean, Fallout Equestria, just on its own, it's done something that I know has been done before, but I've never seen to this extent, in that it has gotten, I won't say published, I'll say printed. They are now on their third print run of this fan fiction. I was lucky enough to get on this one, and I ordered several. I ordered like 3 copies, because what ends up happening is there's such a fan following that once or twice a month somebody decides that they need some money, and so they'll put their old copies of the first 2 print runs up, and they will sell around $500 to $700 for these book collections.
Jeez.
Yeah, oh my goodness, you've not seen this. Yeah, so I actually ended up buying 3 copies on the assumption that maybe a few years down the line.
I gotta get on that train.
Unfortunately, the purchase order has gone through, so you could probably get on the wait list. But yeah, so like paying $50 per copy, and several years down the line, it might end up selling for $500 to $700.
That's something I actually wanted to say, is that the Brony community, there's a lot of money in it.
There is, and actually that's another one of my points. So you mentioned that you have a Patreon. And I tried to also get in contact with some other people. You had mentioned another artist called The Lost Narrator, and I also tried with Scribbler Productions and Visual Pony, who are 3 people that have Patreons that have around like $600 in subscribers, either per month or per project, which is something that's unheard of in podfic in general. There will be fundraisers. Like, I know right now there's, I think, some fundraisers for the ACLU going on, where people can, pay in some amount of money and somebody will record something, but the money goes to charity. But there's actually a Patreon, and I was just kind of curious about your views on that.
Illya, would you like to speak first?
Well, I'm all for it. Scribbler of Scribbler Productions is a good friend of mine. She and I have been sort of in this boat together since we both started doing this. Now, I've got 2,500 subscribers. She's got about 110,000 subscribers. So her Patreon pulls in a great deal of money. I don't have one. But I'm all for it. I mean, she puts a lot of work. I've never seen anybody work that hard. She records, she edits, she produces, she coordinates, just massive amounts of fan work. And so if she didn't get paid for that, I'd feel a little bit bad about it. I know Lost to a certain extent, and I know Visual Pony a little bit, but Scribbler I know very
well. For me, just even having one person donate $1 is huge to me. And when I actually had started narrating, a friend of mine had mentioned, hey, you're really good at this. Why don't you do commission work? And I thought, yeah, I'm good, but I really doubt people would pay money just to hear me read words. And so for the threads on 4chan that I hang out on, I had told that story, and they said, hey, I'd like to pay you. So I was like, all right. I set up a PayPal account. I linked it to a bank and stuff. And the story he had wanted me to read, after I had set up prices, was A Delicate Balance. And it was pretty long. And he had actually commissioned $130 for me to read that story. Right? And a year down the line, another person had commissioned $100 to read, I forget its name, but it's a crossover between My Little Pony and BioShock. And
that sounds long.
It was pretty long stories. And admittedly, I have yet to actually finish either of those 2 commissions. But,
well, I'd like to look into that. I haven't really thought about it. I haven't thought about even monetizing my YouTube or anything. But I'm on the other side of life, and I've owned a business for the last 20 years that I'm in the middle of selling, and I'm going to be close to just sort of retirement and a bit of Social Security and odd jobs before long, probably. And I would like very much for part of that extra income to be audio, if I could figure out how to do it. I like it.
Well, I know this would be odd to say to you, considering your age, but don't. When it comes to monetization on YouTube, don't expect the big bucks right out the door.
Well, not with the few subscribers that I have. No, I wouldn't. And that wasn't really one of the avenues, but I was thinking about maybe doing some commission work or trying to. I've done a couple of audio books that got up to Amazon, but I haven't really made any money. I haven't done anything popular, but I would like to pursue that in some way. I don't know if My Little Pony's the right avenue. It might be something else.
Well, yeah, that's why I've kind of branched out in different fandoms. I've done a couple of Steven Universe stories, and I don't just narrate stories. I also do some Let's Plays where I either speak or don't speak. Yeah, that's you explore every avenue that you can.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll have time to do that soon.
Sort of in a different means of creation, we've mentioned that there's a lot of money going around in My Little Pony. There are other things that are definitely making money, like White Dove Creations. She makes plushies, and the last I'd heard, they go for, aren't they very nearly around $1,000?
Quite often. Yeah, they're great. They're fantastic creations. So.
They're quality plushies.
Yeah, they're very good, handmade. She makes about $1,000 for each of them. And I think that's what she does for a living. And she'll go to conventions, and it's more that there are things on display than that you could actually purchase, because she does get a backlog going. My Little Pony fans they very much have a lot of money to throw around.
Yeah, sure do.
Yeah, I have as a personal story, I was helping with the setup for BabsCon, which is the Bay Area Brony Spectacular, My Little Pony Con in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And so I made a set of custom Cards Against Humanity cards for their charity auction. Mm-hmm. And it ended up auctioning off around $500. And so, granted, this was for charity, but these cards cost maybe $20 to make. And I actually knew the person who bought them, so I was kind of wanting to go up and be like, dude, I could have given you the files. And I did an auction for a second set of these on Desert Bus for charity, and they did it more as a raffle, and that earned several $1,000s for the raffle. So yeah, My Little Pony fans have a lot of money they're willing to throw around.
I think that's the fandoms as a whole. If you make a quality product, you will get money for it if you were willing to sell it. And I know a lot of people, they just do it to do it, not for money. They just like whatever fandom they're in.
Yeah, I mean, I go to a lot of conventions, and I do see a lot of artists selling their prints and things like that. And it's just, at present, it is just that massive still for My Little Pony.
Well, you bring up an interesting point here when you talk about the plushes and how much they sell for, because there seems to be no legal issue in selling a one-of-a-kind item that you create, but you can't do mass things. Like there was a printing of Past Sins, and I got one of them because I got to know Pinstroke, and he gave me one. But they really couldn't sell them for anything more than the cost of producing the books, because they have licensed characters in them. Well, these plushies are licensed characters too, but they're one-of-a-kind items. And like your cards, you couldn't go around, sell 1,000 sets of them if they were My Little Pony related, but you can do one. So there are some, these roads get crossed, but I think that Hasbro probably keeps an eye on it to some extent. But what's advertising, what's advertising and what's trademark infringement? It's close call sometimes.
Yeah, which reminds me of that game project, Fighting is Magic, that got canned.
Yeah, which turned into...
Them's Fighting Herds.
Yeah, there's Lawrence Faust got involved in that.
Yeah, this game, Fighting is Magic, got a cease and desist. And then Lauren Faust, the kind of the recreator of this new series of My Little Pony actually created designs, and they renamed it under Them's Fighting Herds. And so that game, I believe, is coming out in the next quarter. It is very near complete.
I hope it goes well for them. Oh, I remembered the sorry to interrupt you, but I remembered the story of the name of the story, the BioShock crossover. Siren Song.
Kind of just to, bring this to a close and wrap things up, they always want to hear some recommendations. And I mentioned a few to you all, so I'm just going to real quickly kind of just describe these, and then if you have any recommendations, we'll do those. And I think the very first fan recording I have to recommend is one of two options for Fallout Equestria. So it's Fallout Equestria is written by K-Cat, and it's the two people who I know have finished recordings of this are Crazed Rambling or Visual Pony. It's less a reimagining of My Little Pony and more a reimagining of Fallout, where basically you follow the story of a pony who is a vault dweller following a apocalyptic war between the ponies and the zebras. And you follow this pony, Little Pip, as she first goes in search of a fellow vault dweller, and then eventually ends up on this epic quest to save pretty much the world. And it is incredibly long. I think the fan recordings are around 60 to 70 hours. And this is the main story, the one that gets printed. So that's my top recommendation. I've listened to it twice. It is amazing. So my second and third recommendations are actually somewhat related. They're about Doctor Who's. So it is basically a crossover of My Little Pony and Doctor Who, where the Doctor goes through a temporal space-time anomaly, whatever, and ends up in Equestria. The first one is called Doctor Who's Adventures, which is written and produced by Squeak-A-Non. And that one features the Doctor teaming up with the main character of My Little Pony, Twilight Sparkle, as they go through adventures. And the other one is Doctor Who's An Assistant, which is written and produced by Ponies with Pockets. And that one features the character of Ditsy Doo, as they also go off on adventures together. And these two have actually crossed over for a very good 3-part crossover episode, which was themed to Alice in Wonderland. And my final recommendation that I have is the Memoirs of a Royal Guard series, which is written by Ansel and read by Scarlet Blade. And it starts off as a alternate viewpoint on the series, as done from the view of one of the castle's royal guards, as just various events from the first season happen. But it has ended up turning into sort of a pony military story, with the main characters now off in the middle of a war, but also dealing with a lot of relationships with families and romance and things like that. And that's a 3-parter, and that is one of the stories that also I have a print copy of the first book, because it had enough of a following to get a printing as well. So those are my 4 recs, and I was wondering if you two have anything that you would recommend reading or listening to as well.
Oh, go ahead.
The only recommendation that I can really make is Siren Song. My recording or without my recording, it is a beautifully written story. It's not a complete BioShock crossover, because in the BioShock games, civilization has completely collapsed, and everyone is this psychotic mutant. But in Siren Song, there is still some civilization left. There is still some order, and it really adds this this unknown element. Like, it's not retelling the tale of BioShock. It's its own story within the BioShock setting, and That's the only real recommendation I think I could make. I haven't recently read a whole lot. So, yeah, Ilya, anything you'd like to?
Yeah, I'd plug a couple. Well, just a couple of my own to start with. Apotheosis was written by Deatran. It was one I recorded a couple of years ago, and he just wrote this wonderful trilogy about exploring certain aspects of Equestria and a lot of world building. It's very good. And then there was one called Dream that I recorded. That was just a beautiful little sort of it's sort of a fairy tale, but it's a wonderful fable. And it has a good voice, and that's how I choose my stories usually, is if I feel like the voice suits mine, which I seem to be losing at the moment. But Project Sunflower by Hoopy McGee, that was done by Visual Pony. It was a wonderful story. And it's a human in Equestria, a bona fide human in Equestria story, but it's really well written, and I think that Visual Pony did a wonderful job of it. Twilight Sparkle gets a free salad. I don't know if you've heard of that. Gudea Serenade produced this wonderfully funny story. And I could kick myself in the head for not remembering who the actual author is. But give that one a look.
Another thing I'd like to recommend, just because I just remembered it, is The Conversion Bureau, The Other Side of the Spectrum.
Mm.
It's a story in which the Conversion Bureau universe is evil, because, yes, it is. And a major in the human world goes to the real Equestria, the Equestria of the TV show. And so TV show Equestria and the human world, they team up to fight the Conversion Bureau Equestria.
That sounds fascinating.
Yes, and I had actually written a side story as like an alternate universe side story to that story where the humans lose. And I had added Trevor from Grand Theft Auto 5. As I'm glad you two know him. Anyway, he was ponified, but he didn't become, docile as ponified humans become.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the greatest thing I've ever written, but Redskin, who had written the story, the Conversion Bureau story, liked it so much that he actually wrote a chapter for me and written a chapter in his own story that kind of ties it together with mine. Yeah, so I was super appreciative of that, and I really recommend Conversion Bureau, The Other Side of the Spectrum.
I might take a look at that. There's one last one that I haven't read, that I haven't listened to yet, but I want to listen to because it's a good story. It's A Dangerous Business Going Out Your Door, which is a sort of a Tolkien-esque adventure that the ponies take on. And the online recording is by Deep Sky Pony. So at some point, I'm going to get into it and probably listen to that one.
I was checking out my backlog, and I have something around 1,000 hours of My Little Pony fanfic in the backlog right now.
Good Lord.
You guys produce so much stuff, I can't keep up.
There's a lot of it, I'll tell you that.
I think that about wraps us up. So thank you, Voice Guy and Illya Leonov. Thank you very much for joining me. Yeah, I will hand this off to Paraka and Auralphonic, and I will tell you when it's available.
Well, thank you very much for having us on.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Yes.
All right. And I'm going to hang up now.